Hello, my name is Gail and I am a War Studies MA student at King's College London this year. And BizGs has offered me a great opportunity to tackle a subject that I really wanted to investigate further, which is the article that you're just about to read. It analyses Sunni Muslims' loss of their sense of belonging in Iraq's second largest city, Mosul. It's a very specific topic, isn't it? So I wanted to know more and research and learn about what it was like under ISIS's caliphate for Iraqis, and also the consequences of that regime on some communities like Sunni Muslims. In Europe, we've had many ISIS terrorist attacks, and I feel like we can acknowledge this suffering without forgetting that of the people who actually lived under this caliphate and suffered from this rule in a very different way, because it ruled for 3 years in Mosul their whole lives. It was the new state, and I think that's something we forget in Western Europe, because we tend to forget that ISIS did not evolve in a vacuum. It had a very real territorial hold on Syria and Iraq. And so, researching this topic, it was very interesting to see what Western forces had done in Iraq, so especially the US, in 2003, so really going back in time here, and seeing what the impact of this intervention had been on the creation of ISIS was really eye-opening as well, because seeing that if you put people in camps and really concentrate people with real grief, some of them at some point might develop extremist beliefs such as ISIS's and actually act upon them, which can really devastate countries and many communities, as later ISIS's genocide of the Yazidi community really showed. And I think in this sense there was a new also understanding of what the consequences of ISIS terrorist attacks have been in Western Europe through the investigation of Iraq and the consequences of the caliphate in Mosul on the communities, because I feel like you can directly identify some common patterns here around the stigmatization and exclusion of Sunni Muslims that has been really a growing stigma in Western Europe, and also by ignorance of generalization to all Muslims and all Sunnis. And that's what's also been happening on a larger scale, I guess, of violence in Iraq and in Mosul. It's less about Muslim versus other people. It's more about Sunnis versus other communities, or even Sunnis versus Shia and Yazidi. There is this common stigma on a community by generalizing what part of the community has done to the entire community, as if there weren't extremists, as if it wasn't a different branch of Islam. And I think a lot of that ignorance has really led to unprecedented amount of violence and even a second civil war in Iraq. So it is very important to have a better understanding of these dynamics of generalization, of stigma, that really takes people's sense of belonging away from them, and that really prevents them from going home. And that's how I came about this article, which was really emotionally challenging to write and to research, because even as a war studies student who is used to writing about very difficult topics, this one was particularly difficult to stomach, I think, in the way that it really takes a more human perspective than academic research on the topic, and really is concerned with how people are suffering from ISIS's rule, and this emphasis on the human needs really pushes you to have more empathy towards the people who are going through this and really living in camps, unable to come home because they risk getting killed by people seeking revenge for the atrocities committed by ISIS, whether they had anything to do with it or not. And so, because I was researching this human perspective, I found myself watching videos of how Mosul was liberated, for example, and even when it's censored, you can still feel the atmosphere of it and the use of civilians during the war, and you can tell very quickly how hard this conflict must have been for everyone involved in it. And it's really a vicious cycle of every community has immensely suffered and so is also willing to take revenge a lot of the time. Even if it was very challenging to research and write emotionally, intellectually, it was very interesting. And I also really enjoyed making a map for this article because it's something I've always really enjoyed, spending hours on Illustrator. It's really artsy but conceptual as well. And what brings me the most joy is seeing people's reactions to it. It's such a helpful guide for the reader. It's very pedagogic because it's a visual and people can really see where things are and get a better idea of how it all happened. There really is in Iraq this vicious cycle of stigma and revenge from one community to the other that really gives ISIS what it needs to raise from the ashes. Because in the West, a lot of the research focuses on why the US invaded Iraq and also on ISIS terrorist attacks in Western Europe. I feel like it's very important to go back to Iraqi history and that this article can help you have a more human understanding of what it was like to live under the caliphate and what the consequences are on displaced population after the conflicts, especially for the Sunni Muslim community.